If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. All right, let's get into it. It all started, as these things so often do, with a simple two-letter word. A word I hadn't said to my daughter in nearly 20 years. The word was no. So, standing there on my own front porch, in the deepening chill of a November evening, that single word felt like a declaration of war. A war I never wanted to fight, but one that had finally undeniably been brought to my doorstep. My daughter Jessica stared at me, her perfectly made-up face contorting from a mask of practiced sweetness into something ugly and sharp. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was radiating from her, an arctic blast of pure, undiluted entitlement. She had asked for another loan. That's what she always called them. Loans, as if there was ever any intention of repayment. It was a joke between us, except only she was laughing. This time the sum was larger than usual, a breathtaking figure that she tossed out as casually as if asking for pocket money. It was for her newest venture, an experiential wellness retreat for digital influencers. The phrase itself felt like a parody, a string of empty, fashionable words designed to disguise a black hole for my money. I'd funded the failed art gallery, the boutique yoga studio that never opened, the organic dog biscuit delivery service. Each failure was met not with introspection, but with a new, more elaborate dream that required a new, more elaborate check from me. For years I'd gone along with it. A part of me, the foolish, grieving part, was still honoring a promise made to my late wife, Martha. On her deathbed, her voice a fragile whisper, she had gripped my hand and said, "Always look after our Jessie, Henry. She's delicate." I had interpreted delicate as incapable and look after as provide for no matter the cost. For 2 decades I had honored that promise with a blind check-writing devotion that my business sense, the very sense that had built my fortune, screamed against. But something in me had finally broken. Maybe it was turning 76. At that age you start counting your remaining sunsets, and you become fiercely protective of your peace. Or maybe it was the sheer audacity of her request, presented not as a humble plea, but as an invoice for services I was obligated to render. I looked at her, my only child, a woman in her late 40s who still carried herself with the petulant expectation of a teenager. I said it again, my voice quieter this time, but harder, like stone. "No, Jessica. The answer is no. There will be no more loans." The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Her eyes, the same brilliant blue as her mother's, narrowed into slits. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. That wasn't her style. Her weapon of choice was a chilling, surgical coldness. She simply said, "I see. Well, you'll have to find somewhere else to stay tonight then, until you reconsider your position." I must have looked confused. I blinked, the cold air stinging my eyes. "What are you talking about, Jessica? This is my house." A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Actually, Dad, it's our house. You put my name on the deed, remember, for estate planning. And as a co-owner, I no longer feel safe with your instability." Before I could process the monstrousness of that statement, she stepped back inside, the heavy oak door swinging shut with a soft click. And then I heard it, a sound that would echo in my memory for the rest of my days, the sharp, metallic snick of a deadbolt sliding into place, followed by the lower, heavier thud of the security bolt. She had locked me out. I stood there, frozen. I was wearing my old wool cardigan, a pair of worn trousers, and my favorite sheepskin slippers. My wallet was on the hall table, right next to my keys and my phone. Everything I owned, everything that defined me as a person in the modern world, was inside that house. And I was outside, on the street, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a cold that was beginning to seep into my bones. The street lights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. I was Henry Vance, a man who had once commanded boardrooms and moved markets, and I was homeless, cast out into the night by my own flesh and blood, all because I had finally said no. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, it felt less like an emotional wound and more like a physical amputation. A part of my life had just been severed, and I was left standing there bleeding out in the cold. The first 10 minutes were a state of pure, unadulterated shock. My mind simply refused to process the reality of the situation. I raised my hand, my knuckles hovering just inches from the solid oak of the door. I should knock, I should pound on it, demand to be let in. I should shout her name until the neighbors poked their heads out of their windows. But my arm felt impossibly heavy, my will paralyzed by the sheer glacial cruelty of her actions. What would I even say? Please. After that, the word tasted like ash in my mouth. The cold was the next thing I registered. It wasn't a brutal, biting winter night. Not yet, but the damp chill of late autumn had a way of creeping into you, of finding the gaps in your clothing and settling deep in your marrow. My slippers, my comfortable, worn companions for countless quiet evenings, were now a profound liability. The thin leather soles offered no protection from the cold concrete of the porch. I could feel the dampness starting to soak through, a miserable, creeping sensation that started in my toes and began its slow march up my feet. I looked down at them, a ridiculous sight. A 76-year-old man in his house slippers, stranded on a city street. The absurdity of it was so stark it was almost comical, but I felt no urge to laugh. A hollow, cavernous feeling was opening up in my chest, a void where my faith in my daughter used to be. I stumbled down the porch steps and began to walk. I didn't have a destination. I just knew I couldn't stand there, a pathetic statue of paternal failure on her doorstep. The rhythmic slap-slap of my slippers on the pavement was a humiliating soundtrack to my thoughts. Each step was a reminder of my foolishness. The house, the beautiful brownstone I had bought 30 years ago, the place where Martha and I had raised Jessica, where every corner held a memory, it was a prison now. I had put her name on the deed about 10 years ago. Astor, my lawyer, had advised against it. Henry, gift her the money for a down payment on her own place, he'd said, his voice laced with that cautious tone he always used when discussing Jessica. Co-owning property with family can be fraught, especially when one party has a different understanding of financial responsibility. But I hadn't listened. I was still caught in the fog of my promise to Martha. I told myself it was a smart move, a way to simplify the estate, to ensure Jessica would always have a roof over her head. I see now that it wasn't about planning. It was about control. By putting her on the deed, I was anchoring her to me, ensuring I could always look after her. I had forged my own chains, and she had just used them to lock me out. As I walked, the memories came, not as gentle waves of nostalgia, but as sharp, painful shards. I remembered her 16th birthday. She wanted a specific convertible, a sporty little thing in cherry red. It was extravagant, far more than any teenager needed. Martha was already sick then, undergoing her first round of treatment, and the medical bills were starting to pile up. I was working relentlessly, my real estate company still in its aggressive growth phase. We were leveraged to the hilt on a major commercial development downtown, the deal that would ultimately make us, but at the time, it was a terrifying gamble. Every dollar counted. I told Martha we couldn't afford it. Henry, she's only 16 once, Martha had pleaded, her face pale against the hospital pillows. She has her heart set on it. Don't let my situation ruin this for her. The unspoken guilt was a knife in my gut, so I did it. I pulled money from a line of credit I desperately needed for the business, and I bought the car. I remember the look on Jessica's face when she saw it. Not gratitude, not joy, just a placid, satisfied sense of expectation fulfilled, as if it were her birthright. 2 months later, she crashed it, walking away without a scratch but totaling the car. There was no apology, only annoyance that she now had to drive my old sedan. I had swallowed my anger then, telling myself it was just a car, that she was safe, that was all that mattered. But it wasn't just a car, it was a symbol. It was the moment I began teaching her that actions have no consequences, that her father was not a person, but a resource. I thought of Martha's last days. She worried endlessly about Jessica. "She's not strong like you, Henry," she'd whispered, her breath shallow. "The world will be too hard on her. You have to be her shield." I had held her hand, a promise forming in my heart, a vow I would keep with a devastating, misguided loyalty. I would be her shield. I would stand between her and the world, absorbing every blow, paying every price. What I failed to understand was that by shielding her from the world, I had also shielded her from reality, from maturity, from empathy. I had raised a princess in a tower, and when the king finally faltered, she saw no reason to help him. She just locked the door from the inside. My walk had no purpose, but my feet seemed to have a mind of their own. They were taking me downtown, block by miserable block. People passed me on the sidewalk, their faces illuminated for a moment in the glow of streetlights and storefronts. They averted their eyes. I was just another old man on the street, disheveled and lost, a piece of urban scenery to be ignored. The invisibility was a strange kind of pain. For my entire adult life, I had been somebody. I was Henry Vance. My name opened doors. My reputation was my currency. Now, stripped of my wallet, my phone, my home, I was nobody. A ghost in slippers. And then I saw it. Ahead of me, a pool of warm, inviting light spilled out onto the dark street. The grand old building of the city's central library. It was one of the few places that was still open, a public sanctuary. I hadn't been inside in years, decades, maybe. In my world you bought books, you didn't borrow them. But tonight, it wasn't knowledge I was seeking. It was just warmth, a place to sit down that wasn't a cold park bench, a place to escape the gnawing chill and the even more gnawing despair. With a final weary effort, I pulled open one of the heavy brass doors and stepped inside. The change was immediate and overwhelming. The air was warm and smelled of old paper, binding glue, and floor wax, a scent of quiet, accumulated knowledge. The silence was not empty, but full, punctuated by the soft rustle of turning pages and the distant rhythmic thump of a book being stamped. The main reading room was vast, with a soaring cathedral-like ceiling and long polished oak tables where people sat hunched over books and laptops, each in their own private world. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of something other than cold and misery. I felt a sense of peace. I found an empty chair in a far corner, a worn leather armchair that sighed as I sank into it. I just sat there for a long time, letting the warmth soak into my body, my shivering slowly subsiding. I closed my eyes, trying to think, to formulate a plan, but my mind was a maelstrom of anger, grief, and self-recrimination. What was I supposed to do? I had no money, no phone. The few friends I still had were in my contacts list, a universe away. My lawyer, Astor, was the first person I needed to call, but his number was a casualty of my modern reliance on digital memory. I clicked send and felt a strange sense of release. The first move had been made. While I waited, Sarah came by my terminal. She held out a single sheet of paper. It was the map she'd promised, with the address of the Northwood Avenue shelter circled in red ink. "It's about a 20-minute walk from here," she said softly. "They keep a few beds reserved for emergency placements. You just need to tell them you have nowhere else to go. They'll give you a cot, a hot meal, and a shower." I looked at the map, then up at her. "Thank you," I said again. The words felt inadequate. Here she was, a young woman probably making a modest salary, showing more practical compassion than my own millionaire daughter. The contrast was a physical blow. The library's main phone rang at the front desk precisely 15 minutes later. I saw the librarian on duty. "Pick it up," listen for a moment, and then look over in my direction with a puzzled expression. There's an Alistair Finch on the line for a Henry Vance, she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. A few heads lifted from their books, their gazes finding me as I stood up and walked to the desk. The brief, fleeting moment of public exposure was humiliating, but necessary. I took the receiver. Alistair, I said. Henry? My God, what's happened? The Astor building? Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you being blackmailed? His voice was a rapid-fire burst of concern. I'm fine, Alistair, and no, I'm not being blackmailed. Not anymore. My voice was calm, devoid of the turmoil churning inside me. Listen to me carefully. I need you to do exactly as I asked. Get the ball rolling on the sale. Use your private channels. I want it done fast, not necessarily for the top dollar. Speed is the priority. Henry, that's a 9-figure asset. A week of due diligence could mean a $20 million difference in the price. I don't care about the $20 million, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. I care about the principle. Now, about the house. She's locked me out. There was a pause, and then a deep, weary sigh on the other end of the line. She finally did it, didn't she? I knew this day would come. Okay, Henry, don't worry about the house for now. We have options. The way you structured the deed, it's tenants in common, correct? Yes, I confirmed. 50-50. That had been my one concession to Alistair's paranoia years ago. He had insisted on it over a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which would have given her the entire property automatically upon my death. Tenants in common meant my 50% share was mine to control, mine to pass on in my will. It was a small detail, but it was about to become the fulcrum on which this entire affair would turn. Good, Alistair said. That's our leverage. We can file a partition action to force a sale of the property. But let's not play that card just yet. First things first. Where are you? I'll send a car. No, I said firmly. No car. No fancy hotel. Not yet. I have a place to stay tonight. I looked at the map in my hand. I need to experience this. I need to understand the view from the street. It's important for what comes next. Alistair was silent for a moment. He was smart enough to understand I wasn't having a breakdown. I was having a breakthrough. All right, Henry, he said finally, against my better judgment. Call me in the morning from a payphone if you have to. We'll set a meeting. And Henry, be careful. The time for being careful is over, Alistair, I said, and hung up the phone. That night, I checked into the Northwood Avenue shelter. I gave a fake last name, Jenkins, in honor of Sarah, and told the tired-looking man at the intake desk my story, the same edited version I'd given her. He nodded, uninterested. He'd heard 1,000 variations of it. I was given a thin blanket, a threadbare towel, and a cot in a long, cavernous room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I lay there for hours, listening to the symphony of troubled sleep around me, the coughs, the snores, the muttered nightmares of dozens of men whose lives had taken a wrong turn. I should have felt fear. I should have felt disgust. But instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in decades, I was stripped of every trapping of my wealth. I wasn't a real estate mogul. I was just a man on a cot, in a room full of other men with nothing. And in that moment, the plan began to form, not just as a strategy for revenge, but as a new philosophy. My wealth, I realized, was stagnant. It was a number on a series of balance sheets, a collection of properties that existed only to accumulate more value. It was an abstract concept. What was the point of it all? To leave a bigger pile of abstract value to a daughter who had shown she had no concept of real value. No, that wasn't a legacy. It was a punchline to a long, sad joke. The Astor building. I had built it to be a beacon of commerce, a symbol of power. What if I could transform it? What if I could turn that steel and glass into something else entirely? What if I could convert its monetary value into human value? And then I thought of Sarah, her simple, unprompted act of kindness, her cup of tea, her map. She had expected nothing in return. She had helped me simply because I was a person in need. She represented the exact opposite of the ethos Jessica lived by. My daughter saw people as resources to be exploited. Sarah saw them as humans to be helped. The idea bloomed in my mind, fully formed and radiant. It was audacious, magnificent, and deeply, deeply satisfying. I wouldn't just sell the Astor building. I would give the money away, all of it. I would create the single largest endowment the city's public library system had ever seen. A fund so massive it could renovate every single branch, update their technology, expand their collections, and secure their future for a century to come. A legacy of knowledge and sanctuary for everyone, from the scholar to the homeless man in slippers. And there would be one non-negotiable condition, a permanent, legally binding clause in the endowment charter. The grand new children's wing in the central branch, the one that would be built with the first wave of funding, would be named after her. The Sarah Jenkins Children's Wing. It was then that a gentle voice cut through my haze. "Excuse me, sir. Are you all right?" I opened my eyes. A young woman was standing beside my chair. She was a librarian, judging by the plastic ID card clipped to her sweater. She had kind, concerned eyes and a tentative smile. She wasn't looking at me with pity or suspicion, but with genuine human concern. "I'm just a bit cold," I managed to say, my voice raspy. "The heating is a bit temperamental in this old building," she said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Would you like a cup of tea? We keep a kettle in the staff room for emergencies. A sudden cold spell feels like an emergency to me. A cup of tea." It was such a small, simple thing, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. In a world that had suddenly become hostile and sharp-edged, this stranger was offering me a moment of uncomplicated warmth. I felt a lump form in my throat. I just nodded, unable to speak. She returned a few minutes later with a steaming styrofoam cup. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said, handing it to me. My hands were still trembling slightly as I took it. The heat was a shock, a comfort. "Henry," I said, my voice a little stronger. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you more than you know." "It's no trouble at all," she said, her smile widening. "Is there anything else I can help you with? You look a bit lost." The dam inside me finally broke, not in a flood of tears, but in a torrent of words. I didn't tell her the whole story, not the part about the real estate empire or the 9-figure portfolio. I just gave her the simple, humiliating truth. My daughter and I had a disagreement. She locked me out of my house. My wallet, my phone, everything is inside. I just need to contact my lawyer, but I don't know his number by heart. I felt a hot flush of shame as I said it, admitting my own helplessness. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or offer platitudes. She just nodded, her expression shifting from concern to practical determination. "Okay," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "We can solve that. We have public computers you can use. You can look up your lawyer's firm online. And I found a leaflet for the city's emergency shelters. I'll print you a map. It's clean and safe, just for tonight, until you can get things sorted." She led me to a row of computers, her presence a small, steady beacon in my personal fog. She logged me in as a guest, showed me how to open the web browser, and then, with a final pat on my shoulder, she said, "Take all the time you need. We're open for another 2 hours." I sat there staring at the glowing screen, the cup of tea warming my hands. Sarah didn't know who I was. To her, I was just a sad old man in slippers, a piece of life's flotsam washed up in her library. But she had treated me with a dignity I hadn't felt in years, not even from my own family. She had offered help without judgment, kindness without condition, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief and the shock began to recede, replaced by something else, a cold, hard, and perfectly clear resolve. My promise to Martha was to protect our daughter. But I had another, older promise to myself: to never ever be a victim. Jessica had mistaken my kindness for weakness. She had mistaken my generosity for an obligation. She had forgotten who I was. It was time for a reminder. From the anonymous sanctuary of a public library computer, my secret war was about to begin. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming my name. And as I typed the name of Astor Finch's law firm into the search bar, I felt the first spark of my old self returning. The part of me that didn't just own buildings, but built them. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was about to build something new from the ruins of this terrible night. The email I composed from that public computer was a masterpiece of cold, calculated fury, disguised as calm, professional instruction. My fingers, stiff from the cold and trembling with adrenaline, moved slowly over the keyboard. I didn't pour out my story of betrayal. I didn't mention slippers or locked doors. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. The time for that would come later. This was about action. The subject line was simple: "You argent meest, eest." The body of the email was even simpler: "Astor, liquidate the Astor building. Immediately. Contact me via the main reference desk line at the Central Library branch until 10 p.m. tonight. After that, I will be out of contact temporarily. There are other matters to discuss in person. A matter of profound personal urgency has arisen. Henry." I read it over twice. It was perfect. The Astor building was one of the jewels in my portfolio's crown. A 40-story glass and steel tower in the heart of Midtown, fully leased with blue-chip corporate tenants. It was a cash-generating machine, a monument to a deal I had closed 25 years ago that had catapulted me from a successful developer into a different stratosphere of wealth. Mentioning it by name was a signal to Astor, a code between two men who had navigated the treacherous waters of New York real estate for 4 decades. It meant this wasn't a drill. This was a 5-alarm fire. Astor Finch had been more than my lawyer. He was my friend, my confidant, my Cassandra. A tall, stooped man with eyes that had seen every form of human greed and folly. He had been the only person who ever dared to speak the truth to me about Jessica. I remembered a lunch we'd had a few years back, at our usual table at a quiet Italian place downtown. I'd just bailed Jessica out of another financial mess, a curated lifestyle brand that had curated nothing but debt. "Henry," Astor had said, swirling the ice in his glass, "I'm going to say this as your friend, not your lawyer. A safety net is one thing. You've given her that. But what you're providing now is a golden hammock. She has no incentive to stand on her own 2 feet, because she knows you'll always be there to catch her in luxurious comfort." "She's my daughter, Astor," I'd replied, the familiar defensive line. "I'm just looking out for her."
Hugh.
He had countered, his gaze unwavering. "Or are you crippling her? You're a brilliant man, Henry. You built an empire from nothing. You know the value of struggle, of discipline. You've denied her the dignity of her own." His words had stung because they were true. I had dismissed them then, hiding behind my grief and my promise to Martha. Now, sitting in the library's sterile quiet, his voice echoed in my head, not as a criticism, but as a validation. I clicked send and felt a strange sense of release. The first move had been made. While I waited, Sarah came by my terminal. She held out a single sheet of paper. It was the map she'd promised, with the address of the Northwood Avenue shelter circled in red ink. "It's about a 20-minute walk from here," she said softly. "They keep a few beds reserved for emergency placements. You just need to tell them you have nowhere else to go. They'll give you a cot, a hot meal, and a shower." I looked at the map, then up at her. "Thank you," I said again. The words felt inadequate. Here she was, a young woman probably making a modest salary, showing more practical compassion than my own millionaire daughter. The contrast was a physical blow. The library's main phone rang at the front desk precisely 15 minutes later. I saw the librarian on duty pick it up, listen for a moment, and then look over in my direction with a puzzled expression. "There's an Alistair Finch on the line for a Henry Vance," she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. A few heads lifted from their books, their gazes finding me as I stood up and walked to the desk. The brief, fleeting moment of public exposure was humiliating but necessary. I took the receiver. "Alistair," I said. "Henry? My God, what's happened? The Astor building? Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you being blackmailed?" His voice was a rapid-fire burst of concern. "I'm fine, Alistair. And no, I'm not being blackmailed. Not anymore." My voice was calm, devoid of the turmoil churning inside me. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to do exactly as I asked. Get the ball rolling on the sale. Use your private channels. I want it done fast, not necessarily for the top dollar. Speed is the priority. Henry, that's a 9-figure asset. A week of due diligence could mean a $20 million difference in the price." "I don't care about the 20 million, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. "I care about the principle. Now, about the house. She's locked me out." There was a pause and then a deep, weary sigh on the other end of the line. "She finally did it, didn't she? I knew this day would come." "Okay, Henry. Don't worry about the house for now. We have options. The way you structured the deed, it's tenants in common, correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. 50-50. That had been my one concession to Alistair's paranoia years ago. He had insisted on it over a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which would have given her the entire property automatically upon my death. Tenants in common meant my 50% share was mine to control, mine to pass on in my will. It was a small detail, but it was about to become the fulcrum on which this entire affair would turn. "Good," Alistair said. "That's our leverage. We can file a partition action to force a sale of the property. But let's not play that card just yet. First things first. Where are you? I'll send a car." "No," I said firmly. "No car. No fancy hotel. Not yet. I have a place to stay tonight." I looked at the map in my hand. "I need to experience this. I need to understand the view from the street. It's important for what comes next." Alistair was silent for a moment. He was smart enough to understand I wasn't having a breakdown. I was having a breakthrough. "All right, Henry," he said finally, against my better judgment. "Call me in the morning from a payphone if you have to. We'll set a meeting. And Henry, be careful." "The time for being careful is over, Alistair," I said, and hung up the phone. That night, I checked into the Northwood Avenue shelter. I gave a fake last name, Jenkins, in honor of Sarah, and told the tired-looking man at the intake desk my story, the same edited version I'd given her. He nodded, uninterested. He'd heard 1,000 variations of it. I was given a thin blanket, a threadbare towel, and a cot in a long, cavernous room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I lay there for hours, listening to the symphony of troubled sleep around me, the coughs, the snores, the muttered nightmares of dozens of men whose lives had taken a wrong turn. I should have felt fear. I should have felt disgust. But instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in decades, I was stripped of every trapping of my wealth. I wasn't a real estate mogul. I was just a man on a cot, in a room full of other men with nothing. And in that moment, the plan began to form, not just as a strategy for revenge, but as a new philosophy. My wealth, I realized, was stagnant. It was a number on a series of balance sheets, a collection of properties that existed only to accumulate more value. It was an abstract concept. What was the point of it all? To leave a bigger pile of abstract value to a daughter who had shown she had no concept of real value. No, that wasn't a legacy. It was a punchline to a long, sad joke. The Astor building. I had built it to be a beacon of commerce, a symbol of power. What if I could transform it? What if I could turn that steel and glass into something else entirely? What if I could convert its monetary value into human value? And then I thought of Sarah. Her simple, unprompted act of kindness, her cup of tea, her map. She had expected nothing in return. She had helped me simply because I was a person in need. She represented the exact opposite of the ethos Jessica lived by. My daughter saw people as resources to be exploited. Sarah saw them as humans to be helped. The idea bloomed in my mind, fully formed and radiant. It was audacious, magnificent, and deeply, deeply satisfying. I wouldn't just sell the Astor building. I would give the money away, all of it. I would create the single largest endowment the city's public library system had ever seen. A fund so massive it could renovate every single branch, update their technology, expand their collections, and secure their future for a century to come. A legacy of knowledge and sanctuary for everyone from the scholar to the homeless man in slippers. And there would be one non-negotiable condition, a permanent, legally binding clause in the endowment charter. The grand new children's wing in the central branch, the one that would be built with the first wave of funding, would be named after her, the Sarah Jenkins Children's Wing. She would never know why. She would probably assume it was some wealthy philanthropist with the same last name. It didn't matter. I wouldn't do it for her praise. I would do it as a monument to the idea that a single small act of decency can be more powerful than a skyscraper. It was the perfect plan. It wasn't just about punishing Jessica's greed. It was about rewarding Sarah's grace. It was about turning my fortune from a private hoard into a public good. Lying there on that lumpy cot, surrounded by strangers, I felt a sense of purpose so profound it almost hurt. I was no longer just a wronged father. I was a man with a mission, and the richest man in the room wasn't the one with the most money. It was the one with the best plan. I closed my eyes, and for the first time all night I slept. The next morning, I was a man transformed. The despair of the previous night had been burned away, replaced by the cold, clean fire of purpose. I had a mission, and every part of my old life, every skill I had honed over 50 years of building my empire, was now being brought to bear on this new project. I left the shelter at dawn, my brief sojourn into destitution having served its purpose. It had scraped me clean, removed the barnacles of complacency, and reminded me of what it felt like to have nothing, which is the best way to appreciate everything you're about to build. I found a payphone, a relic from another era that now felt like a vital tool, and called Astor. "I'm ready to meet," I said. "Book the presidential suite at the Carlyle. Under your name. I'll meet you there in 2 hours." The shift in my tone was not lost on him. The hesitant, shell-shocked man from the library was gone. The CEO was back in charge. When I arrived, Astor was waiting for me. He had brought a bag from my tailor with a fresh suit, shirt, shoes, the uniform of my old life. He'd also brought a burn phone, a simple, untraceable device. As I showered and dressed, shedding the skin of the victim and donning the armor of the victor, I laid out the full plan for him. Not just the sale of the Astor building, but the creation of the endowment. Astor listened, his expression unreadable. He sat in an armchair by the vast window overlooking Central Park, steepling his fingers as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "Henry," he finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of the numbers involved, "are you absolutely sure about this? This isn't just a donation. This is a legacy-defining act. The sale of the Astor building will trigger a massive capital gains event. We're talking tens of millions in taxes alone. And the endowment, a perpetual fund of this size, is an immense undertaking. It will change the city's philanthropic landscape." "Good," I said, knotting my silk tie with steady hands. "Let it. What good is a legacy if it's just a number in a ledger passed down to someone who spits on the very idea of it? I spent my life accumulating capital. It's time that capital was put to work for something more than just accumulating more of itself." "And the condition?" he asked. "The Sarah Jenkins Children's Wing. Who is she?" "She's the woman who gave me a cup of tea when I had nothing," I said simply. "She's the catalyst. She's the point of all this. Without her, it's just a rich man's revenge. With her, it's a statement. Now, let's get to work. I want you to start the process of establishing a new charitable foundation, the Henry and Martha Vance Foundation. Martha's name has to be on it. This is for her, too. It's a reinterpretation of my promise. For the next few days, the suite at the Carlisle became my war room. Astor and his team worked around the clock. The sale of the Astor building was already in motion, handled with surgical precision through a discreet network of international property brokers. An offer, a very strong one from a Singaporean sovereign wealth fund looking for a stable foothold in Manhattan, was already on the table. They wanted to close quickly and quietly. It was perfect. While the deal makers did their work, I focused on the house. This was the part of the plan that required a more delicate touch. It was the immediate, tangible symbol of Jessica's betrayal. The partition action, Astor explained, laying out the legal documents on the coffee table. It's a lawsuit you file as a co-owner when you can't agree on what to do with a property. The court almost always orders a forced sale, with the proceeds to be divided according to ownership percentage. It's an ugly, brutish legal instrument, but effective. What will happen when she gets served? I asked. She'll have to hire a lawyer. She'll be advised to settle, to agree to a voluntary sale to avoid the legal costs and the public auction on the courthouse steps. It will force her hand. Good, I said. But we don't serve her yet. We let her panic first, and panic she did. The first domino to fall was her primary credit card, the one with an obscene credit limit that I had been dutifully paying off every month for 15 years. I had Astor call the company, identify himself as my legal counsel, and cancel the card immediately. The first call from Jessica to my old, now deactivated phone must have come a day or two later. I imagined the scene, her at the checkout of some ridiculously expensive boutique, her arms full of clothes, the cashier's polite but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this card has been declined." The hot flush of public humiliation. The calls then started coming to Astor's office. His secretary, a formidable woman named Margaret who had been with him for 30 years, acted as a gatekeeper. Jessica Vance to speak with Mr. Finch. Margaret reported to us on the second day. "Tell her you'll pass on the message," Astor instructed, a grim smile on his face. The messages, which Margaret transcribed verbatim, were a study in escalating panic. The first was indignant. "Tell my father his credit card isn't working. He needs to fix it immediately. It's incredibly embarrassing." The second, a day later, was laced with confusion and anger. "Why isn't he answering my calls? What is going on? I have bills to pay. The utilities for the house are due. Is this some kind of sick game?" The third, 2 days after that, was when the fear started to creep in. "Astor, I need to speak to him, or to you. Something is wrong. Is he okay? People are calling me about bills. The landscaping service, the pool maintenance. I don't handle these things. He always handles these things. Please, just have him call me." I read the transcripts without a flicker of emotion. The man who would have once rushed to solve her every problem was gone. In his place was a quiet, patient predator watching his trap slowly tighten. While she was flailing, I was moving. Astor arranged a series of discreet meetings for me. I met with the chair of the library's board of trustees, a sharp, elegant woman named Eleanor Vance, a distant cousin, ironically, though we'd never met, and the city's commissioner for cultural affairs. We met in a private room at a club, not Astor's office. I was introduced simply as a representative for an anonymous benefactor. I laid out the proposal without mentioning the specific amount yet. I spoke of a transformational gift, an endowment designed to secure the library system's future. I watched their faces change from polite interest to stunned disbelief. "A gift of this potential magnitude," Eleanor said, choosing her words carefully, "would be the most significant in the library's history. It would be paradigm-shifting." "The benefactor has one condition," I said, leaning forward, "a specific naming right for the new children's wing at the central branch." This was the moment, the linchpin of the entire plan. I could see them preparing to hear the name of a wife, a parent, or the benefactor himself. "The wing is to be named the Sarah Jenkins Children's Wing," I stated, my voice perfectly even. Eleanor Vance frowned slightly. Sarah Jenkins? I'm not familiar with that name. Is she a relation of the benefactor? No, I replied. She's a librarian at the Central Branch. The silence in the room was absolute. The commissioner stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Eleanor looked from me to Astor and back again, her sharp mind clearly trying to compute this bizarre piece of information. A 9-figure donation to name a building after a rank-and-file librarian. It was unheard of, it was madness, and it was beautiful. The benefactor believes, I continued, enjoying the moment immensely, that legacies should honor the people who do the work, not just the people who write the checks. Miss Jenkins performed an act of kindness for him at a difficult time. This is his way of acknowledging it. It is, I must stress, non-negotiable. Eleanor Vance slowly broke into a smile. Well, she said, I think I can say on behalf of the board that we are deeply moved by the benefactor's philosophy. The wheels were in motion. The sale of the building was days from closing. The foundation was legally established. The library board was salivating, and Jessica was adrift in a sea of canceled services and unanswered calls. It was time for the next move. Astor, I said, back in the quiet of our hotel suite. It's time. Send her the letter. The letter was a work of art, a single page of crisp, formal legalese. It didn't mention money. It didn't mention her behavior. It simply and coldly stated my legal intent, as 50% owner of the property at 127 Elm Street, to file a petition in court to partition and sell the property, and to distribute the proceeds accordingly. It was a declaration of war delivered by messenger, a silent official confirmation that the world she knew had just ended. The silent takeover was nearly complete. The foundation of her life, a foundation I had foolishly built for her, was about to be ripped out from under her feet. The letter from Astor's office arrived at the house by courier. I can picture the scene with perfect clarity. Jessica, likely stressed and frayed from a week of unexplained financial chaos, seeing the official-looking envelope from my lawyer's firm. Perhaps a flicker of hope crossed her mind. Maybe this was the explanation. Maybe this was Dad fixing everything, as he always did. Then, she would have opened it. The dense formal language of the law would have been like a foreign tongue, but the key phrases would have been unmistakable. Petition to partition, forced sale of the property, pursuant to the rights of a tenant in common. The meaning, even to her, would have been brutally clear. I wasn't just cutting off her allowance. I was taking the house. Her first reaction, as reported by Astor's ever-patient secretary Margaret, was not to call a lawyer. It was to call me, or rather to leave a new series of increasingly unhinged voicemails on Astor's office line, which he had instructed Margaret to forward to my burn phone as audio files. Listening to them was a strange, almost out-of-body experience. The first message was a sputtering rage. What is this? What the hell is this, Dad? You can't do this. This is my home. You are trying to make me homeless, after everything I've done to maintain this house for you. You have lost your mind. You call me back this instant. The phrase "everything I've done to maintain this house" was particularly rich. Her idea of maintenance was calling the contractors that I paid for, but in her mind she was the long-suffering curator of a family estate. This was the core of her delusion, the narrative she had constructed to justify her own parasitic existence. The second message, a few hours later, shifted to a pleading, manipulative tone. The anger had failed, so now it was time for guilt. Dad, please, I don't understand what I did. It was just a loan. If that's what this is about, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I won't ask again. Just don't do this. Don't take my home. Mom would have never wanted this. She would be horrified. Think of her, Dad, please. Hearing her invoke her mother's memory, the very memory she had used as a shield for her greed for 2 decades, was the moment any lingering flicker of pity I might have felt for her was extinguished for good. She wasn't just entitled. She was a ghoul picking at the bones of our shared grief for her own advantage. While she was descending into her spiral, my world was expanding. The sale of the Astor building closed. A staggering sum of money, more than I could ever spend, was transferred into a holding account controlled by my new foundation. The number was so large it seemed unreal, a string of zeros on a screen, but I knew exactly what it was for. It was the ammunition for the final phase of my plan. The power shift was palpable. By withholding it, I had taken all her weapons away. She was screaming into a void, and the silence that answered her was more terrifying than any argument I could have made. Her next move was predictable. She tried to mobilize the family. This was what the script_profile calls the family exodus, and it played out exactly as one would expect. She called my late wife's sister, Aunt Carol. She called our cousins, the Donahues. She fed them a carefully crafted story. Her father was having some kind of mental break. He'd gone missing. He was being manipulated by his lawyer. He was trying to sell her home out from under her, out of pure spite. The first few calls I received on my burn phone were from concerned, or rather meddling, relatives. "Henry, it's Carol," my sister-in-law said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Jessica is beside herself with worry." "What on earth is going on?" "Selling the house." That was Martha's home. My response was simple and unchanging. "Carol, this is a private matter between me and my daughter. I appreciate your concern, but I will be handling it." "But she says you've cut her off." "The poor girl has no money." "Jessica is a 48-year-old woman," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "She received a world-class education and has had numerous opportunities, all funded by me. Her financial situation is a result of her own choices. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." I hung up. I did the same with cousin Mike Donahue when he called, lecturing me on my duties as a father. They weren't accustomed to this Henry. They were used to the pliable, guilt-ridden widower who could be counted on to keep the family peace at any cost. This new steel-spined version was a stranger to them. The interesting thing happened over the next week. As word spread that the Bank of Dad was permanently closed, the nature of the family's concern shifted. Their support for Jessica, which had been so vociferous, began to quietly evaporate. They were never really on her side. They were on the side of the lifestyle my money afforded the extended family. The lavish Christmas parties I hosted, the generous gifts, the occasional loan to a cousin who was in a tight spot. They had supported Jessica because she was the gatekeeper to my wealth. With the gatekeeper fired and the vault sealed, they had no more use for her. She was no longer the cherished princess of the family. She was just another relative with money problems. The exodus was not from me, but from her. Meanwhile, a small article appeared in the financial section of the city's main newspaper. It was a brief, dry piece about recent major real estate transactions. Midtown's iconic Astor building was sold this week in a private deal for an undisclosed sum, rumored to be north of $400 million. The seller, a long-term private holding company, has not been identified. I read the article over breakfast in my hotel suite. I knew Jessica read that section of the paper. She liked to keep up with the world of the wealthy, a world she felt she belonged in. But I also knew with absolute certainty that she would never connect that story to me. In her mind, I was her father, the man who lived in the brownstone and lived off his investments. She had no concept of the scale of my wealth. I had always been careful to keep it that way, a fact I was now profoundly grateful for. My greatest asset over the years wasn't my portfolio, it was her ignorance. She was living in a castle, complaining about the decor, completely unaware that her father owned the entire mountain. the castle was built on. The dramatic irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. The power had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic reversal. She just didn't know it yet. She was fighting a battle over a single house, while I was waging a campaign that would reshape a corner of the city. The final confrontation was coming, and she was bringing a knife to a tidal wave. The breaking point arrived, as I knew it would, in the form of an official-looking envelope from the county court. Jessica had been formally served with the partition lawsuit. This was no longer a threatening letter from a lawyer. This was a legal action, a summons. It meant she had a limited time to respond, to hire counsel, to face the machine of the justice system. The abstract threat had become a concrete reality, with a deadline. Her desperation finally forced her to do the one thing she should have done in the first place. She hired a lawyer. A man named Peterson, according to Astor, who did a bit of due diligence and quickly realized his client was in an indefensible position. Peterson's first and only smart move was to call Astor and request a settlement meeting. He knew that fighting a partition action between tenants in common was a fool's errand that would only enrich the lawyers. "She wants to meet," Astor informed me, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Peterson is trying to frame it as a family reconciliation meeting, but we both know what it is. It's a surrender." "Then we will accept her surrender," I said. "Book the main conference room at your firm for Friday at 10 a.m. No more hiding. I'll be there in person." On Friday morning, I walked into the offices of Finch, Covington & Stowe for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I was dressed in one of my best suits, a dark charcoal gray that I'd always felt projected an aura of quiet authority. I was no longer the shivering man in slippers. I was Henry Vance, and I was there to close a deal. I waited in the conference room with Astor. The room was on the 50th floor, with a panoramic view of the city I had spent my life building. It felt appropriate. Jessica arrived a few minutes late, a classic power move that now just seemed pathetic. She walked in with her lawyer, a harried-looking man who seemed to be sweating despite the cool temperature of the room. Jessica, however, looked immaculate. She was wearing a severe black dress, her hair pulled back tightly. It was a costume, designed to make her look like a serious, wrong businesswoman. But her eyes betrayed her. They were filled with a toxic cocktail of fury, fear, and disbelief. She didn't look at me at first. She sat down, arranged her files, and let her lawyer speak. "Mr. Vance, Mr. Finch," Peterson began, his voice straining for a conciliatory tone. "My client, Miss Vance, is hoping we can resolve this unfortunate family matter amicably. She is, of course, deeply hurt by this aggressive and unnecessary legal action. This is her home we're talking about." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and measured, "let's dispense with the theatrics. This is not a family matter. This is a business transaction. Your client and I are co-owners of a real estate asset. I wish to liquidate my half of that asset. That is my legal right. The only thing to discuss today is the timeline for the sale." Jessica's head snapped up. She glared at me, her mask of composure cracking. "How can you be so cold?" she hissed, ignoring her lawyer's frantic hand gesture to stay quiet. "This is about a loan, a stupid loan. And for that you're throwing me out on the street? Out of my own mother's house?" "It was never about the loan, Jessica," I said, meeting her gaze. "The loan was just the final page in a very long, very sad book. And for the record, it stopped being your mother's house when you used it to discard me like a piece of garbage." She was about to launch into another tirade, another recitation of her grievances, but I raised my hand, a simple gesture that cut her off mid-sentence. "There is something you need to see," I said. I slid a slim folder across the vast polished surface of the conference table. It stopped directly in front of her. She looked at it with suspicion. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. Her lawyer leaned over to look as she tentatively opened the folder. Inside was a single document. It was the press release Astor's firm had prepared, scheduled to be released to the media that afternoon. The headline was stark: Henry and Martha Vance Foundation announces record-breaking $425 million endowment to City Library System. Jessica's eyes scanned the first paragraph, her brow furrowed in confusion. I watched as the information slowly processed. The name of the foundation, the astronomical sum of money, the source of the funds, listed as proceeds from the recent sale of the Astor office building. Her face went pale. The connection was finally made. The newspaper article, the mysterious seller. It was me. Her father, the man she thought was a simple retiree, was the anonymous whale behind one of the biggest real estate deals of the year. The entire world she thought she knew was tilting on its axis. But it was the last paragraph that delivered the final fatal blow. The endowment comes with a single legally binding condition requested by the anonymous benefactor, that the new state-of-the-art children's wing to be constructed at the Central Library branch be permanently named the Sarah Jenkins Children's Wing. Jessica looked up from the paper, her face a mask of utter bewilderment. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, uncomprehending shock. Sarah Jenkins, she whispered. The name alien on her tongue. Who the hell is Sarah Jenkins? And that was the moment I had been waiting for. The culmination of my entire plan. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but clear and sharp as a shard of glass. She's the librarian who helped me find a homeless shelter on the night you changed the locks on our house, I said. She treated me with kindness and dignity. She gave me a cup of tea. It seems that in my world, Jessica, a simple cup of tea is now worth $425 million. That is the new exchange rate. The color drained completely from her face. The implications of my words washed over her like a physical wave. The money, the vast, unimaginable fortune she had always assumed would one day be hers, was gone. It had been given away, not to another relative, not to a new wife, but to the entire city. And the honor, the legacy, the name on the building had been given to a complete stranger, a woman whose only role in this drama was to be kind. It was a checkmate so total, so absolute, that there was no response. The house will be sold, I said, my voice returning to its calm, businesslike tone. You will receive your legally entitled 50% of the net proceeds. A substantial sum, I assure you. It should be more than enough for you to build a life for yourself if you are capable. But I want to be perfectly clear. After that check clears, you will never receive another dollar from me or my estate for as long as you live. The foundation is my sole heir now. The tap, as they say, is off. Permanently. I stood up. Astor has the sale agreement for you to sign. I suggest you do so. I turned and walked toward the door. Not looking back, I could feel her eyes on me, her entire world collapsing behind them. It wasn't a feeling of triumph. It wasn't joy. It was the quiet, somber satisfaction of a necessary, long-overdue amputation. I had cut the diseased limb from my life, and I was finally free. It was never about revenge, but in the end, building a legacy of grace on the ashes of greed felt an awful lot like vindication. In the months that followed, the world settled into its new shape. The sale of the house went through quickly. Jessica, on the advice of her shell-shocked lawyer, signed the papers without another word of protest. The fight had gone out of her. Astor's firm wired her a check for her 50% share, a little over $2 million. After taxes and fees, a fortune to most people, but to someone who had been expecting 100 times that, I imagine it felt like pocket change. I heard through Astor, who heard it through the legal grapevine, that she bought a small condo in a different state and vanished from the city. She never tried to contact me again. The silence was a relief so profound it felt like a physical weight being lifted from my shoulders.